All right, folks, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Allegory of the Cave right now. So you read it, you drew a picture. You might be thinking, what is this? Why are we doing story time in philosophy? Well, because one of the most prominent Western philosophers is Plato, and also Socrates, his teacher. And Socrates didn't write anything down. In fact, he thought that if you write something down, there's this real danger because people might read it and not understand what you meant. And so he wants to do all philosophy through conversation. But then his student, Plato, went and wrote down everything he said. Well, maybe. We're not exactly sure how accurate it all is. And maybe that would be much to Socrates' chagrin, but a lot of us are excited that we still have these dialogues. So this comes from the Republic, which is a Socratic dialogue written in 380 BCE. And Socrates and his friends are discussing the meaning of justice and trying to figure out whether the just person is happier than the unjust person. They also discuss his theory of forms, what poetry is, if the soul is immortal. But we're not going to deal with all of these things. We're just going to look at the allegory. So at this point, when he starts talking about the cave, he's trying to explain the relationship between being and becoming, between what is and what changes, or the forms and the things. It's a little bit complicated. He establishes, however, that he can only explain these complicated concepts through some analogies or images. The first one is this allegory of the cave, and it takes as its focal point the question of education. He starts at the beginning. Let me show you in a figure or in an image how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Socrates claims that the prisoners in this cave that he's drawing for us with words are like ourselves. So I'm going to want you to think as you're reflecting here, what does it mean that they're like ourselves? Are they still like ourselves today in 2020? And he says that, they believe what they see because they have no reason not to. However, the truth they see is literally nothing but the shadows of the images. All right, so they're chained up. They're facing a wall. Behind them is like a little bridge, another wall, and there are items on that, and those are being reflected by the light of a fire onto the wall in front of them, and so they're only seeing the shadows. But since they've been like this their whole lives, they have no idea that they're like this. They have no idea that they are tied up, and they have no idea that the things they're seeing are actually just shadows of images of objects behind them. All right, so when the first person kind of gets released from this, or the prisoner he's talking about, it actually isn't an easy process. It's painful. It requires force. So the person who's releasing the prisoner has to kind of force them out of this position, pull them out of the cave. And when the person gets out of the cave, their eyes are having a hard time adjusting to the light. So they have to take some steps. First, they look at the shadows outside. Then they look at reflections in water. Then they look at the objects themselves, so my pens or something. Then they can see the moons and the star by night. And then finally, they can look at the sun itself, and they're going to recognize that the sun is really the cause of a lot of things. So before we get into the descent back into the cave, I want you to take a moment and think about all of these elements. The cave itself, the objects in the cave, the objects outside the cave, the prisoners, the prison guards, the sun, and I want you to think about what they represent. So if this is an analogy, what are they representing? So take a moment and think about this and put your answers in the discussion that comes next in the module. All right, thanks.